So yes, so it's how you finance your vision and your mission whilst then also managing the risks to your organization. So there's actually lots of things that you're juggling whilst trying to make sure that your finances are sustainable. So there's a balance between ensuring that your organization can adapt to all the external things that are going on and all the requirements that are facing your organization, but then at the same time, maximizing the impact of your work, but with the resources that you have available. So it is really thinking about, you want to maximize your work, what's happening around us, and what resources do we have to be able to achieve our vision and our goals. So that's what that means there. So just to get your thinking going, and to get some thoughts from you, if you can just in the chat have a think, what would your organization have if it was financially sustainable? It may already be, and you may already feel it is financially sustainable. So what are the elements that you think support your organization's financial sustainability? Oh wow, we're on fire this morning. So Ellie, permanent contracts. Okay, yes, if your staff have full-time permanent contracts, that might indicate you have some sustainability. Additional staff, being able to bring in additional staff. Yeah, thanks, Claire. Okay, brilliant answer. Reserves contingency fund, and I'll be talking more about that later on this morning. Yeah, long-term private sector partnerships. And that's a really key point, partnerships and what they bring also to your finances. So yeah, great point there. Another good point, yeah, diversified funding sources. So that's a great lead on to other slides that I have later, but not just one or two funding sources, but many. And we're really firing on the comments now. Conservation mission done. Yes, that might be a definite indicator. You know, you've achieved what you set out to do. Great partnerships. Yep. Thank you, Nancy. Julie, secured sources of income. That's a very good point. So not just potential, but actually knowing that you can rely on your sources of income. And yes, unrestricted funds. That's the aim for most organizations, is to have unrestricted funds. Staff and time for future thinking and planning. Yes, being able to take stock, to look at what you want to do, not just firefighting, not just trying to get things done, but actually having the time shows you might be financially sustainable. Expanded activities, yeah, so being able to actually increase the goals that you're using. And hi, Sakun, nice to see you as well. So there's lots of ideas coming through, which tells me that we're already thinking quite a lot about finances. And this is possibly one of the biggest questions that you'll be thinking about in your organization. How do we fund what we want to do? Yeah, we've got some others. Start to communicate with donors. Oh, yes, and keep them on board. So keeping relationships open on board. Financial independence and control. And that's an interesting one, Nancy, and I may turn to you a little later to explain that further. But yes, financial independence, being able to think about what you want to do with your funds. Brilliant. Okay, you're on fire this morning, which is wonderful to see. I have some more questions later, so thank you. So you've hit most of these indicators that are here for financial sustainability. So we said diversified funding, including unrestricted funds. So having different types of funding, and that might mean short term, it might mean long term. And unrestricted funding means that you're not bound by someone else's rules into how you spend that money. You can choose where you would like to put those resources or that funding. Having enough financial reserves to see you through the tough times. And this is actually quite a big aim for lots of organisations, particularly smaller ones or ones that are newer. This is quite an aspiration. But having a source of savings, a source of money to be able to pull on at times when you need it most, especially after there's been risky situations or issues, can be very helpful. And many of you have picked up on the strong stakeholder relationships, including partners and donors. And these can bring other things, not just money to the relationship, but also other resources, other things that you might need to be able to make sure that your organization is sustainable. And we'll talk a little more about what they might be later on. And then it's up to you to be aware of the risks that might impact your organization. What are the things that might be occurring now or in the future that might disrupt the finances that you're receiving or the support that you're receiving? And this could be anything. And it only takes sometimes a small thing to cause problems. So in terms of being aware of those risks, making sure that you are ready to deal with them. And it can be good to have those reserves available in case some of those risks or the impact of those risks is actually realized. You can also, by understanding your risks, budget for them so that you know that if something were to happen, and it's quite likely to happen in the future, what is it we need to be able to save in order to manage that? So yes, so you'd already hit all of those, and I've just dived into some of them, so you're on fire here. So why is it important? So having a financial strategy, having a financial plan, this is taking the time to sit back and think about the direction that you're going. And this, again, isn't always easy. There is so much going on in your organization. To be honest, sometimes you just need to get the money in and you don't have time to even think how you're going to do it because we're all struggling to actually get your salaries, fund the work. But if you can find the time to be able to think about this, I truly recommend it. And it will help create, hopefully, more sustainability. And in doing this planning process, you can think about how to reduce the dependency on your donors, particularly if it is just one or two and you're very dependent on them. That's quite a big risk. You can think about how to grow, how you want to develop the organization. Do you want to stay as you are? Do you want to grow? How are you going to finance it? And then how are you going to build good relationships and support in the local community? How are you going to sustain yourselves? What do you want to do? And then also, and I've said this, but how are you going to achieve your objectives and your mission? So ideally, you will already have a strategic plan. You will have a mission and you will have objectives and you know what you want to achieve and what you want to change to achieve that mission. The financial strategy underpins all of that. And this is, right, we know what we want to do, but how are we going to afford to do it? And actually, sometimes by doing your financial strategy, you realize that your objectives perhaps aren't as realistic as you thought, and you might actually need to cut them down and push them to the future because you just don't have the resources to do it. So it helps really focus your attention on what you're doing. So again, this is quite a quick overview. I'm just going to take you now through developing a financial strategy and the questions you might ask yourself. This is quite quick, so please do put some questions in the chat if you think of them, and we'll either answer them at the end or we'll discuss them further later on in the Slack. But I'm really keen to see if you have any concerns or want to share any of your own experiences. So you've come to do a plan, and there are 4 basic questions you need to answer. Think about where you are now. What's your current situation? Where do you want to be? Bringing into mind your strategic plan. And then thinking, right, we know we want to be, how are we going to get there? What actions do we need to take? And then on top of that, we now know what we want to do, but what policies do we need to have in place to be able to enact what we want to do? What does everybody in the organisation need to follow to be able to get us to where we need to be? And I'm going to touch on those now. Okay, so where are we? So to start with, we focus on where the organisation is. This is the start of your strategy. What are we doing? And there's different ways that we do this. But it will include looking at the risks. It will include also looking at the opportunities for the future. What else can we use? Broad scale thinking, horizon scanning at this point. And this needs some creativity and more than one person to do this, both for the risks and opportunities. And then really digging deep into the resources you have available. So this is a take stock moment. Where are we? What do we have? And there's different activities you can do to enable this. One is to look at your current stakeholders. And as I'm talking, perhaps you can write in the chat some examples of your current stakeholders, and we'll have a look at those. I would advise you to look at your own strengths, your weaknesses, and your opportunities, and also the constraints. And this is normally called a SWOT analysis. I'm not going to go through this today, but again, this is a resource you can access through the website. But it really helps think about all the achievements that you have, plus some of the limitations and restrictions that you're going to need to balance with what your strengths are. You would look at your past and current donor dependency. How reliant are you on certain donors? Are you fully reliant on one or two? Do you have a more diversified donor base? Are you able to use that? So what is your past and what is your current? Look at your reserves. And for some that may be, we don't have any right now, and that's absolutely fine. That's just where you are. Maybe you want to plan towards that. And also looking, and this follows on a little from the donor dependency, looking at your past and current funding mix. So what I'm actually going to do is jump a little bit more into reserves and explain those, and also what the funding mix looks like. Okay, so reserves, there's a lot of text here, and I've actually put quite a bit of text on the slide because I'm hoping that you can take it away and read through it later. So don't try to do all the reading right now. But this is for something you can look at a little later on. And there's different types of reserves. Some of you may have them in your organizations and some of you may not. The most obvious one is just a general purposes fund, a general use reserve. And this is something that you might use for any purpose. It's not restricted in terms of where you can use the money. And just because you're an NGO and you can't build a profit, it doesn't mean you can't have what's effectively a savings account. So this is what reserves are. Some reserves are more accessible than others. You may want to put your savings account away and access it later. Say if there's a big issue or a problem, COVID strikes, you want to know that you have some reserves tucked away to support staff with salaries and to cover, immediate core costs. So they may be reserves that you don't access. You could have another reserves fund, which is for short term and more easily accessible to cover things when, if funding gets low, you may access that. You may have a restricted fund or reserve where actually the donor is stating what rules allow you to use the reserves for or the account for. Sometimes it's just a build-up of restricted funds that you need to use for your project. So the money you have there is just money that you need to make sure that leads to your projects, but it's still a surplus in your accounts. You may have a designated fund, things specifically committed for a purpose. So you might have a governing body, and this is a fund specifically to make sure that they have what resources they need to operate. You may have a different set of funds for another purpose. So it's earmarked for something specific. Capital fund, what assets do you have? And that might be your buildings that you own, your vehicles, your cars. So if you needed to, there's money invested in those, but it's not really something you access that often, but it's still worth money. And then an endowment fund, this is something that every organisation hopes for, but very rarely do you have endowment funds. We're not lucky, but this is money that comes in, and it's normally from one donor, and it will sit there and gain investment, and you can use the investment, the interest, not investment, the interest over time, so it can come through to your organisation for unrestricted purposes. Again, how to have reserves, easier said than done. So there are several ways you can do this. You can explore your cost recovery options, and that might mean that you can charge your fees for some of your services. It might mean that you make sure that you have a salary cost for when you're talking to writing out your time for donors. You have a specific salary cost, or you do consultancy work and you actually charge a fee, or perhaps you have another way of recovering those costs. If you do have a bank account and you do have some savings, or you just have a bank account and you get interest, you can set that interest aside for reserves. So you might get a little bit every month, every year. You can move that interest into a savings account. And the same with public donations. So maybe you ask the public for donations for whatever reason. This could go straight into a reserve. Again, you could fundraise. You could do an activity such as a forest challenge, name the species. There could be lots of different things, and you build an activity and you ask people to, you fundraise that way, so you get donations in there. Remember with this though, if you are doing an activity and you are looking to build funds that way, the activity itself can take quite a bit of time to manage, to pull together. So bear that in mind. So you might have to offset the time and resources it takes to generate an activity with what your return is. And you can organise a special appeal for donors and for members of the public to give you money. FFI often puts out an appeal every so often asking people to give their money for something specific. If you don't have the reserves, or you don't have them right now, you can also look at your restricted funds, and you can maximize the potential of those restricted funds. When you are costing your budget, you should use some of the funds within your project to cover those difficult to cover budget items. So sometimes you might have a project and there might be things, laptops, if you can, core costs. So you want to make sure you budget for those first when you're applying to donors. And again, sometimes you might have a surplus amount of funds left over from your projects. It might be a very small amount. You can communicate or talk to your donor. And if it is unspent, if you've done everything you said you would, there are unspent funds, maybe have a conversation with your donor and ask if you can keep that small amount of money. And sometimes they will agree, but have the conversation with them. Don't just keep it. So funding mix. This is another activity that we do, and it's probably a really good way for you to start thinking about what's coming in to your organisation and how you arrange it. And if we were doing this activity together, I would, this is possibly an activity that is best facilitated if you can have someone who is taking you through it, but equally you can do it by yourselves. And you have a table like this, and you decide and you think about what funding is coming in that is unrestricted, so that's the top line, and what funding that's coming in that is restricted. And your general fundraising, so you can think, right, what is our income at the moment for our unrestricted funds? What short to medium term funding do we have coming in, that we don't have too many rules that govern us? And these might be one-off grants, or they might be public donations for a specific set of work. And you just think about how much or what percentage of that is coming in. And then core financing, and this might be an investment income, an endowment, maybe a local authority grant. And again, this is unrestricted and tends to go towards your core operations. So it can be quite flexible, easy to use. What percentage of your income can be accounted for core financing? And then look towards the restricted funds. And this is where most people or most organizations find that their money sits within. Sometimes you have long-term project funding, and this is long-term is probably 3 to 5 years for a project, relatively restricted, but it's a large chunk of money for you to spend for a longer project activity. And then short-term project funding, this is very restricted, 1 to 3 years. So you have to spend the money quickly, and it can come. And this is where most organizations, when you look at their funding mix, this is the biggest source of income, is the short-term funding. So it might look something like this. And as you can see, and again, I wouldn't look too hard at this. And this is just an example from one organization, but a lot of this has changed. But as you can see, 30% of their income came from short-term project funding. Some came from general fundraising, and that might be your enterprise, donations, and then only one long-term project fund. So each organization is unique in what their funding mix looks like, and it will be different for yours, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's similar in terms of the percentages. So you can create your own funding mix, and at the end in Slack, I'll pop a resource in, and it might be something that you could take away, discuss with your teams about your own funding mix. Where's your unrestricted funds coming from? Where's your restricted funds coming from? And then you think, well, what would we like for the future? So if most of your money is coming in through the short-term restricted funding from different donors, perhaps you'd like to move that into long-term funding, or again, unrestricted funding. So once you've thought about your current situation, and that was a lot of analysis that you've just done, a lot of research, specifically if you're looking at your stakeholders and your SWOT, you've done a whole in-depth research, and it does take that much to understand what you want, then think about where you want to be. And this is thinking about where you want to be is probably aiming for about 3 to 5 years. It is up to you, but it should underpin your strategy. So if your strategy is 3 years, this plan should also be 3 years. And it will pull on all the information that you've looked at previously. So it will look at what you want or hope to achieve for your funding mix. It will also link to how well you think, how donor dependent you are. And by donor dependent, this is linked to the funding mix, but it just shows you how dependent you are on donor income. And this is expressed as what your donor income is as a percentage of your overall. Most is quite high, and that's not really a problem. It's just looking at where you would like that to be. And then looking at where you think what reserves you would like. Maybe you would just like to start an account, or maybe you think, right, we would like enough money in our account to be able to survive, or our organization to survive for a number of days or months without external funding. So keeping all that in mind, you can think about where you want to be. So then you would think, right, we've got all this information, we have an idea, what objectives or financial targets do we want? So, and this might be, look at your objectives, and this might look something like this. So one of your objectives or your targets might be to establish long-term funding partners and donors. Maybe you want your funds to cover 100% of the organization's core costs. That would be real achievement. And then there's others that are not necessarily specifically about funding, but maybe your membership model needs to be reevaluated and redefined. Maybe a lot of the income comes from your membership base, and actually your membership, you haven't had time to look at managing your membership. Maybe you need to restructure how that works. And then once you've done that, the income may increase. So there's different ways of looking at it. Branding is another one. How many people know about you? Do donors know about you? So there's lots of different ways here. So then you would write these statements of your objectives and think about those targets. And when I say up to 3, maybe 5, but the more you have, the more you have to do. And the statement should be realistic, compatible with your mission, clear, and achievable. So it's very useful to go back and think, right, can we actually do everything that we're saying that we can do? And then once you've got your objectives, you then start to speed up. You know what your targets are. You know how they underpin the strategy. So we're then thinking about actions. We know what we want to see change. How are we going to do it? And this might think now about how are we going to increase and mix up our unrestricted funds? Perhaps you're going to branch out and be more entrepreneurial, have an enterprise, something that brings you in unrestricted funds. How are we going to build up core costs and reserves? How are you going to maintain your assets, your buildings, your cars? And then how can we apply those funds to achieve maximum benefit? So remove any waste. Think about how you can cut costs or make costs more efficient and spend more efficient. And again, you would write out statements that fit under each objectives and exactly the same, realistic, compatible, clear, and achievable. So you have your statements to follow and you know how you're going to do it. And then finally, I know this has been a whistle-stop tour here, but we need to think about, right, we've got these actions. Well, how are we going to ask the organization and staff within the organization to follow and understand what it is that we want to do? And so we will write some policies. And I know that policies have been a big, or thinking about writing policies is often a big requirement for organizations. And they will guide your conditions or rules that guide your activities. And it's important that they look at both the internal and external knowledge that you have. And once you have these rules and you've got your policies on paper, it's really important then to clearly think how you're going to communicate them to everybody and helping them to understand or ensuring that everybody understands what they mean. Because very often you write them down, you think we've done it, it's great, but actually you need to communicate. And again, a lot of text. Don't try and read it all. I've put this again for the purposes that if you read it later, you can have a look at some of the examples. But these might be, and I've got 4 examples here of what policies you might have that might underpin your financial strategic plan. So firstly, you might have a reserves policy. So you've thought about in the future, we want reserves and we're going to do it a certain way. We know how we're going to build them up. And your policy would show and show what this process would be. So what level of reserves you want to build up and how any surplus will be handled. And it's just that pathway. So you write down the pathway to how you're going to get your reserves. Okay. Core costs policy. And again, core costs are sometimes not as focused on as they should be, and they're everything you need to run your organization. So what method will you use to recover some of these core costs from your projects or your funders? Have you thought about ways to be efficient with covering your core costs? And it will also help possibly help you understand if some of the projects that you aren't able to retrieve some of those core costs inefficiently, how can you pull from other bigger projects to help sustain those smaller ones? So you'll think about that as you're writing the policy. Pricing and cost recovery policy. Oh, it does sound dry, but really important. Where are the charges that you're making to service users? And this will, if you have got ways that you're costing your organization, or perhaps you have got an enterprise that you're running, this policy will help dictate what rules you use for it. And then an ethical policy. We're also keen on getting the money in because it's needed and absolutely necessary. But there may be a point where you want to think about who you're getting it from and whether you want to receive those funds. So maybe the stakeholder that you're receiving it from could be a big company, or the donor is a big company, or it's just deciding on whether or not you would like to accept those funds from that donor. And that's a conversation that you would need to have internally and make those decisions first, and then it would be written here. And this might be particular if you're involved with advocacy work. So that was a lot of information, and I haven't got that much involvement for you, but what I've done, I hope, is just give you a doorway into this process and thinking. I can see some things coming up in the chat, and I'm hoping that we can have a chance to have questions. But what I'm going to do now is stop sharing. And I'm going to hand over to Estrela from Fundação Príncipe and to tell us a little bit more about their organization's journey and how they've managed their finances over the last few years. So thanks, Estrela. I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Laura. And I hope the technology help us. Can you see it well? Yes.
Yes.
So hi, everyone. Yeah. Go
It
ahead.
just needs to go into reading view if you want to.
Yes, I think it's okay. Now it is.
Okay, it's up to you.
Perfect. Thank you. So hi, everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and share with you our experience on Fundação and the work we have been doing. And I hope that we kind of inspire you for the good and for the bad as well today. And so my name is Estrela Matilde, and I'm the director of Fundação Príncipe. We are a small NGO on the island of Príncipe Island in West Africa, São Tomé and Príncipe. And our history is a little different from the other organizations or the majority of NGOs, I think. We are a local NGO. We started in 2015. And at the moment, we have a staff of 64 people and 92% are locals. And we have an annual budget of around 500K. And our mission is to create economic and social opportunities on the island using conservation as a tool, and we hope to inspire the current and the future generations on it. And our history is different because we started from a single donor. We started from this private company called HBD, where this multimillionaire guy called Mark Shuttleworth is investing on the island, and he had a lot of money. And myself, I was working for him, and in one point he decided to separate what was investments, what was social and environmental work. So he created Fundação Príncipe Trust. And for 1 year we started with a single donor, and we say it was the golden times because cocoa is the golden of Africa. So it was the golden times where we have a lot of money and not a concern in the world. And we will think this was a good scenery, but having one single donor is never a sustainable option and is never very safety as well. Laura, can you confirm that you are seeing the slides moving?
Yes, I am. Estrela, I'm just going to ask you for the interpreters,
yeah,
take a breath every now
yeah.
but I can't do.
I'm sorry, everyone. I will try to speak slowly. So we started as a single donor, and we had a lot of money from this single guy, and you will think this was the good times where we had not a single concern in the world. But this also attracts some other partners, and our work started being some way recognized. And in 2016, we started actually a new project with another donor, which was Darwin Initiative by invitations of the Exeter University. So we started increasing our donor diversity, but not as much as you can see. But despite that, not even 1 year after we started, the donor decided that we should all go away. So he decided that he's going to cut his funding, he's going to cut his investments, and obviously everything that was not tourism should stop. And the plan was, to close everything, and they sent a lot of people away. I was the only remain one on the expat team, and we had like 5 local people. And we were very, what we're going to do now. We really believed that we had a mission and we had a goal, and we could actually start doing something. So what was important for us was to have the good friends. And here is where FFI had an amazing role, as FFI was hired at the time to help Fundação to develop our strategy, our conservation strategy, helping the development of the organization. And when we become without money and without donor, and we ask FFI, are you able to still help us around? Are you able to still be involved with Fundação and involved with our work and helping us grow? And of course, FFI said, obviously. And so we started a very good partnership that is still until today, and is very responsible for the situation where we are as a small NGO now. So we had a new start. We were reborn, and we start applying for grants, developing and growing. And what we need for that is projects and people. FFI seconded some international staff to us. FFI start applying for projects with us as an implementer partner on the island, and we start growing. That was a new life for us, and a better life, I would say. FFI, especially here, our friend Sarah helped us a lot developing our strategic plan, thinking about our strategic objectives, and we did it in a participatory way with our team. Everybody was involved, and I remember when we sit with them and think and have this discussing, like, it's like our father. We had a lot of money, now just send us away, and we have to start being responsible for ourselves, paying our bills. But the good thing is that we also going to be taking decisions and going in this direction we want to go. And everybody was so on board. Everybody was like, let's go do it. We can do it, because we involved them. We heard them. We understand what their goals were. So we start growing with them and as a team together. And that was the most important part, I think. And another important part of that helped us a lot as a local organization to where should we start? And someone did a question on the chat, like, what is where did we start with that? And I think the Capacity for Conservation website, it is an amazing tool for that, because it really gives you a list of how a healthy organization should be. Like, what do you need to have? Because it can be very overwhelming to think, how can we achieve that? And we start doing that assessment regularly and see what we have and where we need to go. And that was an amazing tool that we still use up to date. And what we want is to be strong, to be resilient, to be competent, to be responsible, productive, be an example, not only on the island, in the country, but internationally. And of course, be happy with the work we are doing and the island, because in the end, even without energy and power and a lot of things, we are in a paradise. So today, how do we know that we are a thriving organization after all of this? How do we know? Well, we look at our amazing partners and everything that Laura has been talking about it, and we look at the indicators that she just shared with us, the indicators of the financial sustainability. So the first one was the diversified funds. As you saw, we start with one single donor. So we need to be, and that's not sustainable. In a moment that that donor decided to close it, then we lost everything. So to have a diversified funding is essential. So this is our reality today. Today we have a bunch of new donors. You can see that neither of them is funding more than 50% of our projects. And we have 19 different donors and projects because some are the same donors. So I would say that we are in a very healthy situation regarding our diversified funding. And for you to have a better idea, this is the evolution. This is how we started and this is how we are today. And that for me is we are very check on our health indicator of the financial sustainability. But not only the diversification of donors, but also the unrestricted funds that Laura was talking. That's very important to have. We have a lot of donors and a lot of projects and a lot of restricted funds that we can only use for that. And as every one of you know, we need money to spend on other things that the donors don't like to pay. And that is really important for the sustainability of our organization. So we had to develop a unrestricted funds plan, more or less, and start finding ways of us receiving donations, also do consultancy services, selling books, selling merchandising, and we were very fortunate that here on the island, the tourism company, the previous owner, started a conservation levy, which means that there is a percentage of the tourism revenue that come to us and is donated to us directly. And that money we can use as an unrestricted fund, which is really, really good. And it is like a breath of air for us. And obviously the blast overheads that are very, very essential. And how do we achieve, and someone was asking that as well, when we started with FFI helping us with big projects, big donors, obviously FFI being the leader of the project will get the overheads of the project or the majority of the overheads. So how do we start moving that towards us receiving as well overheads? Well, with the delivering our results and the donors knowing us, knowing that we can implement the projects. And here I put the CPF very big away, because if you can see in our donor list, we already had a CPF 5 and 6 and 4 and 3. So we had different grants from CPF, and we started with the one, which was the B project led by FFI, to the last CPFs, which was led by us directly. So that is an improvement, and that shows accountability and that we are recognized. And we have several other donors that this is happening. We are showing results and they keep giving us donations and grants. And another indicator is to have the reserves that Laura also mentioned. That is super important, and I think that we as small NGOs are a very in a very good place in that sense. And we had to do a financial sustainability strategy to understand what we need our reserves for. So we did analysis on our monthly and annual expenses as well. And we also developed our reserves policy. And the exercise we did was to understand how much do we need, like, for example, how much do we need for 9 months of correct operational expenses, that if we don't receive any other grants, how much money do we need So that is the money we need to have in our account as a reserves. And also, that is a hard conversation to have, but if something happened, how much do we need to close our organization? So how much do we need to finish, pay salaries, and close without any debts? So we did all of that exercise to understand how much do we need on our reserves policy. And I put it the 2019 in highlight for me to talk you later about that. And another indicator is a strong stakeholder relationship, as Laura was saying. That is essentially, and growing on overhead, growing in project diversification, that happen when you have a strong relationship with partners, stakeholders, donors, everything. And today, this is our network of donors, and I'm really proud that we achieved, this beautiful landscape of so many donors, but more important than the donors, because actually they are as is the partners, and that is also a network that is growing every day and still keeps growing. And our visibility with investing in our website, in our social media, in our communications, making sure we are known, we share the work we do. That is very important to make this relationship stronger and to increase our visibility and our accountability as well. And another important thing with the local stakeholders is also have our grievance mechanism. So we make sure that we are accountable also locally, that the communities can come and share their concerns, and they can see us as as an organization they can trust. So if we are a strong and trustful organization locally, that is also a good image that passes to our partners outside and our donors. We also have been receiving evaluations from donors. In this case was UNDP, which evaluates us as a low-risk organization. So that is very positive and also open us to other funds in the future. Receiving awards, that was also something that is always very good for our image and show, and obviously I have to brag myself a little bit, but receiving the We Play award was also fantastic for Fundação, because it makes us putting us out there. People will know about us, will know about our work, and that is essential to achieve or attract more donors, more donations, more partners, etc. And the last indicator, obviously, is the risks that Laura also mentioned, and they are so important. And with the pandemic, we understand how much it is relevant to have in mind all the risks that we sometimes don't think about it. And we have a risk mapping of the risks that we identified many years ago, and obviously these need to be updated, and we try to do risk assessment every year and do it in a participatory way with our staff, so we understand and we have a mitigation plan for the risks that are the reddest, the more risk one. And also having a monitoring and evaluation plan is very important, so you can learn from the projects, from the activities, from the problems, and you can improve and implement that, and that will help us grow. And you will look at that and think that we are very, very, very happy and healthy organization, and we could jump because we don't have a single concern in the world. But actually, that's not true for any organization, I would say. I would say that we are at the moment swimming very comfortable, but we are still threatened. We are a local organization. We suffer from the triple insularity of living in a small island in the middle of the ocean in Africa. We suffer a lot of difficulties and logisticals, and not only, and that have a direct impact on the projects, on the costs, and on the results and on the outcomes of our work. So we still need to work. We still need to be vigilant. We need to be looking at our finance in a regular way. We need to start finding alternatives, keep finding alternatives to have different unrestricted funds, making sure that we keep our costs reduced and our income high. So we keep using the capacity for conservation website. We keep using that tool to understand how we evolve. And the 2019 is here for you to see that we actually are not as updated as we should. So the last time we did it was in 2019. We need to do it again. So we need to understand how we are now today, and that show you that we still are getting there. We are not 100% on the way where we want to be. There is still a lot to do, a lot to improve, a lot to achieve, especially in terms of policies and the organization of Fundação. We improved a lot all these years, but we still need to do much more. So the important part is for us to keep rolling, no matter what, to keep going, to keep moving, to keep showing results. And the key advices, if I am in the position to give some, it is to have a good and strong partner, as we were lucky to have, is invest in our team. I always say that my dream is to become unemployed because I want to have a local person in my position. And we had such an amazing examples already of seeing growing. And for the sustainability of the organization, we need to have the local people in place, having more and more responsibilities, managing projects, and that happens when we invest in them. Not be afraid to ask for help. I think that's important. We sometimes try to do a lot, and there is so many people out there doing an amazing job, and we can learn so much from each other. Starting with small steps, but not being afraid of dreaming big. And more important, to breathe. I think I was doing this presentation and I was starting to feel overwhelmed of, oh my God, I still need to update all of this. I have so much to do. Oh my God, I didn't do this policy. Oh my God. And, we're fine. It's fine. We will do it in our time. We just need to breathe. We keep having ourselves in the middle of fires every day, solving issues. And there is a lot of things that are postponed, and that's okay. We are doing fine. And as long as we keep going, we are doing fine. So essential is to have an amazing team, as we do have, because that is what is more important. Not only the team that work with us, our partners that are the other sides, everyone that has been learning a lot. So thank you so much for this opportunity. It is an amazing opportunity to be here sharing what I think is a good and a beautiful story. And I'm really proud of everything we achieved so far. And will not possible and will not be here today without FFI, without Sarah, without everybody that's been helping us so much to grow. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Estrela, for that. That was a fantastic journey through everything Fundação Príncipe has been through and the ups and the downs, but also thank you for sharing with such clarity some of the detail in terms of where you are and where you want to go. And I think you're right, taking a step back and planning and just taking a breath, because it can get overwhelming, is essential.